Listen carefully. The biggest lie you've ever been told is that you need motivation before you take action. You don't. Motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. It shows up when life is easy and disappears the moment life becomes difficult. Discipline is different. Discipline acts when it doesn't feel like acting. Discipline works when motivation is gone. Discipline keeps moving when emotions say, stop. And here's the truth that will change your life. The people you admire are not more motivated than you. They are more disciplined than you. In this audiobook, you're going to learn how to stop waiting, stop negotiating with yourself, and build the kind of discipline that works every single day, whether you feel like it or not. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop waiting to feel ready. Let me tell you something that most people never realize until it's too late. You are not stuck because you lack talent. You are not stuck because you lack intelligence. You are not stuck because you lack opportunity. You are stuck because you keep waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the right mood. Waiting for more confidence. Waiting until you're fully prepared. Waiting until fear disappears. And while you're waiting, life keeps moving. The disciplined person starts. The undisciplined person waits. That's the difference. Not talent, not luck, not genetics. Action. You have a choice. You can spend another year preparing to begin, or you can begin. Most people believe readiness comes first. They think successful people felt confident before they acted. They think entrepreneurs were certain before launching a business. They think athletes were fearless before competing. They think leaders were comfortable before taking responsibility. None of that is true. Readiness is not something you discover. Readiness is something you create. That's the key. Action creates readiness. Waiting creates weakness. Say it again. Action creates readiness. Waiting creates weakness. Every day you delay, you teach yourself a dangerous lesson. You teach yourself that hesitation is acceptable. You teach yourself that fear should be obeyed. You teach yourself that uncertainty is a valid reason to stop. And the more often you teach yourself those lessons, the stronger they become. Soon, hesitation becomes your identity. Procrastination becomes your habit. Delay becomes your lifestyle. Then one day you wake up wondering why your life hasn't changed. But life didn't fail you. You simply never started. You have a choice. You can keep collecting information, or you can start creating results. Because information without action is entertainment. Knowledge without execution is useless. A plan without movement is fantasy. The world doesn't reward intention. The world rewards execution. That's the key. Action creates readiness. Waiting creates weakness. Look at a child learning to walk. The child doesn't attend a seminar about walking. The child doesn't read 10 books about walking. The child doesn't wait until confidence arrives. The child stands up, falls down, gets up again, falls again, repeats the process, and eventually walks. Confidence came after action, not before. The lesson never changes. Only the stakes become larger. The adult who wants a better career follows the same principle. The entrepreneur follows the same principle. The athlete follows the same principle. The writer follows the same principle. The person who changes their life follows the same principle. Action first, confidence second. Never the other way around. Consider the entrepreneur who launches a business. People love to look at successful companies and imagine their founders knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't. Most entrepreneurs begin with uncertainty. Many begin with fear. Many begin with limited resources. Many begin without guarantees. They don't have confidence. They build confidence. They don't have certainty. They create certainty through repetition. Every phone call, every mistake, every lesson, every adjustment, confidence grows. That's the key. Confidence is earned. Confidence is not granted. You don't need certainty. You need movement. You don't need perfect conditions. You need action. You don't need their permission. You need discipline. The people who succeed are not fearless. They simply refuse to wait for fear to disappear. Think about that. If successful people waited until they felt ready, they would never have started. The business would never exist. The book would never be written. The skill would never be learned. The opportunity would never be discovered, because action reveals opportunities that planning alone can never see. You have a choice. You can keep asking yourself, what if I fail? Or you can ask a better question. What happens if I never begin? That question changes everything, because failure teaches. Delay destroys. Failure gives feedback. Delay gives regret. Failure creates growth. Delay creates weakness. One path moves you forward. The other keeps you trapped. Action creates readiness. Waiting creates weakness. Now let's talk about something even more dangerous. Waiting is not merely a behavior. Waiting becomes a habit. At first, you postpone one decision, then another, then another. Soon, your brain learns a pattern. Whenever discomfort appears, delay. Whenever uncertainty appears, delay. Whenever fear appears, delay. You become a professional postponement expert. You know exactly how to delay your dreams. You tell yourself you'll start next week, then next month, then next year. Years pass. Nothing changes. Because every delay strengthens the habit of delay. The longer you wait, the harder starting becomes. The task grows larger in your mind. The fear grows larger in your mind. The resistance grows larger in your mind. Not because the challenge changed, because your hesitation grew. That's why discipline demands immediate action. Not reckless action, not foolish action, immediate action. One step, one phone call, one application, one workout, one page, one decision, movement. That's all. The goal is not perfection. The goal is momentum. Most people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline means doing extraordinary things. It doesn't. Discipline means doing the necessary thing before you feel ready. Again, discipline means doing the necessary thing before you feel ready. Start before you're ready. Those 4 words can change your life. Start before you're ready. The perfect moment does not exist. The perfect mood does not exist. The perfect circumstance does not exist. What exists is now. What exists is opportunity. What exists is choice. You have a choice. You can wait, or you can act. One creates growth. The other creates regret. One builds confidence. The other builds fear. One builds discipline. The other builds excuses. And every day, whether you realize it or not, you're making that choice. Remember this lesson. Action creates readiness. Waiting creates weakness. Start before you're ready. Start before you're confident. Start before you're certain. Start before you're comfortable. Because the person you want to become is waiting on the other side of action, not the other side of preparation, not the other side of motivation, the other side of action. Master this principle and you will separate yourself from the majority of people who spend their lives waiting. You stopped waiting to feel ready. Now it's time to destroy the next illusion that keeps people trapped. Because if waiting is the disease, motivation is often the excuse. Chapter 2. Motivation is a liar. There is a reason so many people start strong and finish weak. There is a reason so many goals are abandoned. There is a reason January is filled with ambition and December is filled with excuses. The reason is simple. Most people have built their lives around motivation, and motivation is a liar. That may sound harsh. Good, you need to hear it. Because motivation has fooled millions of people into believing that progress requires a feeling. It doesn't. Motivation is emotional, discipline is behavioral. Motivation asks, do I feel like it? Discipline asks, does it need to be done? That is the difference. And that difference changes everything. Most people love motivation because motivation feels powerful. When you're motivated, everything seems possible. You want to wake up early. You want to exercise. You want to build the business. You want to learn the skill. You want to change your life. But motivation has a weakness. It depends on emotion, and emotions are unstable. That's the key. What happens when stress arrives? What happens when you're tired? What happens when you're bored? What happens when progress slows down? What happens when life becomes difficult? Motivation disappears. It vanishes. And suddenly, the person who promised to work hard starts making excuses. The workout gets skipped. The project gets delayed. The goal gets postponed. The dream gets placed on hold. Again, not because the goal changed, because the feeling changed. And that is exactly why motivation cannot be trusted. If you need motivation, you're already vulnerable. Remember that. If you need motivation, you're already vulnerable because you've placed your success in the hands of something temporary, something emotional, something unreliable. Imagine a pilot who only flies when they feel inspired. Imagine a surgeon who only operates when they feel motivated. Imagine a firefighter who only responds when they're in the mood. It sounds ridiculous. Why? Because important responsibilities cannot depend on feelings. Neither can your future. You have a choice. You can build your life around emotions, or you can build your life around standards. One creates inconsistency. The other creates results. Now let's compare two people. Person A waits for motivation. Person B follows a schedule. Person A wakes up and checks their feelings. Person B wakes up and checks the plan. Person A exercises when inspired. Person B exercises when scheduled. Person A works when energized. Person B works when necessary. Person A starts fast. Person B continues steadily. At the end of one day, the difference may be invisible. At the end of 1 week, the difference may be small. At the end of 1 month, the difference becomes noticeable. At the end of 1 year, the difference becomes massive. Why? Because consistency always beats intensity. Read that again. Consistency always beats intensity. The motivated person often works hard for 3 days. The disciplined person works steadily for 300 days. Who wins? The answer is obvious. The disciplined person dominates, not because they're smarter, not because they're more talented, not because they're luckier, because they showed up again and again and again. That's the key. Success is rarely built through heroic moments. Success is usually built through ordinary repetition. 1 workout, 1 page, 1 sales call, 1 practice session, 1 difficult conversation, repeated over time. Most people underestimate the power of consistency because consistency feels boring. Intensity feels exciting. Intensity gets attention. Consistency gets results. That's why disciplined people often look average in the beginning. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing spectacular happens. They simply continue. Then one day, people call them successful. But what others call success is usually the result of years of consistency. You don't need motivation. You need repetition. You don't need excitement. You need standards. You don't need their permission. You need discipline. Now let's talk about something most people never understand. Your brain is not designed for achievement. Your brain is designed for survival, and survival loves comfort. Your brain wants certainty. Your brain wants convenience. Your brain wants the familiar. Your brain wants the easy path. That's why resistance appears whenever you try to grow. That's why you suddenly feel tired when it's time to work. That's why distractions become attractive when it's time to focus. That's why procrastination feels comfortable. The brain naturally seeks comfort. The brain naturally avoids discomfort. That's normal. The problem begins when you obey every impulse. When comfort becomes your leader, growth becomes impossible. You have a choice. You can obey comfort, or you can obey purpose. One builds weakness, the other builds strength. Many people use motivation as a disguise for comfort. They say they're waiting for inspiration. What they're really doing is avoiding discomfort. They say they're waiting for the right mindset. What they're really doing is avoiding action. They say they'll start when they're motivated. What they're really saying is they'll start when it's easy. And growth is rarely easy. That's the key. Motivation often becomes an excuse for delay. The phrase sounds harmless. I'll do it when I feel motivated. But hidden inside that sentence is surrender. You're handing control of your future to your emotions. You're allowing feelings to make decisions. And feelings are terrible leaders. Feelings change every day. Standards do not. Commitments do not. Discipline does not. That's why disciplined people use a different philosophy. 3 simple words. Do it anyway. You don't feel like exercising. Do it anyway. You don't feel like studying. Do it anyway. You don't feel like working. Do it anyway. You don't feel confident. Do it anyway. You don't feel ready. Do it anyway. Those 3 words are powerful because they destroy excuses. They remove emotion from the decision. The question is no longer how you feel. The question becomes what must be done. That's the mindset of disciplined people. They don't ask whether they feel motivated. They ask whether the task matters. If the answer is yes, they act. Do it anyway. Again, do it anyway. That simple principle can transform your life because every time you act despite resistance, you strengthen discipline. Every time you obey purpose instead of comfort, you strengthen discipline. Every time you move without motivation, you strengthen discipline. And eventually something incredible happens. You stop needing motivation. You stop waiting for inspiration. You stop negotiating with yourself. You simply execute. That is freedom. That is power. That is discipline. Remember the lesson. Motivation is temporary. Discipline is dependable. Motivation disappears under pressure. Discipline survives pressure. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. If you need motivation, you're already vulnerable. Consistency always beats intensity. And when in doubt, do it anyway. Master this principle and you'll stop being controlled by your feelings. You'll start being controlled by your standards. And standards create results. You stopped waiting to feel ready. Now you've learned why motivation cannot be trusted. The next step is even more powerful. Because discipline becomes unstoppable when decisions stop being debated. Chapter 3. Make decisions once. Most people are exhausted long before they do any meaningful work. Not because the work is difficult, not because the task is impossible, not because they lack ability. They're exhausted because they're constantly negotiating with themselves. Every morning becomes a debate. Should I wake up now or sleep longer? Should I work out today or skip it? Should I focus or check my phone? Should I start now or later? Should I stay committed or take a break? Decision after decision after decision, and every one of those decisions drains energy. That's the problem. The average person doesn't lose because they make bad decisions. They lose because they keep making the same decision over and over again. Successful people understand something different. They understand that discipline is not built through endless choices. Discipline is built through permanent decisions. That's the key. Decide once, repeat forever. Say it again. Decide once, repeat forever. The most disciplined people are not constantly deciding what to do. They already decided years ago. The workout isn't a daily question, it's scheduled. The reading habit isn't a daily debate, it's automatic. The wake-up time isn't negotiated, it's fixed. The action has already been approved. Now all that's left is execution. That is how discipline becomes powerful. Most people think successful people have stronger willpower. Often they simply have fewer decisions. Think about that. Imagine two people. The first person wakes up every day asking whether they should exercise. The second person decided 6 months ago that exercise happens at 6 o'clock every morning. Who faces more resistance? The answer is obvious. The first person fights a battle every day. The second person simply follows a rule. One depends on emotion. The other depends on structure. One negotiates, the other executes. You have a choice. You can build a life filled with daily debates, or you can build a life filled with automatic action. One drains energy, the other creates momentum. Decide once, repeat forever. The power of this principle is difficult to overstate because every decision requires mental energy. Every debate requires attention. Every negotiation creates friction, and friction is the enemy of consistency. Let's look at something simple. Waking up early. Most people approach it incorrectly. Every morning becomes a discussion. Maybe I'll wake up early today. Maybe I'll sleep a little longer. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Maybe I deserve more rest. Maybe I'll start next week. The debate never ends. And because the debate never ends, the habit never forms. Disciplined people do something different. They make one decision. I wake up at 6. That's it. The decision is over. The negotiation is finished. There is no daily vote. There is only execution. That's the key. The fewer decisions you make, the stronger your discipline becomes. Now apply the same principle to reading. Most people say they want to read more, but they never decide when. They never decide where. They never decide how much. As a result, reading becomes optional, and optional behaviors rarely survive. Disciplined people create certainty. 10 pages every night, same chair, same time, same routine. The decision is already made. Again, decide once, repeat forever. The same principle applies to exercise, to work, to business, to saving money, to learning skills, to every meaningful goal. Success loves systems. Failure loves negotiations. Most people spend years searching for motivation. What they actually need is structure. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. It's not about excitement. It's about systems. It's not about feelings. It's about repetition. You don't need their permission. You need a process. And once that process exists, your life begins to change. Now let's discuss something dangerous. Internal debates. The conversations you have with yourself every day. Those silent negotiations are more destructive than most people realize because every debate weakens commitment. You tell yourself you'll work out. Then you debate. You tell yourself you'll focus. Then you debate. You tell yourself you'll finish the project. Then you debate. And eventually the debate becomes more powerful than the goal. Think about how much energy is wasted this way. Hours spent deciding, minutes spent acting. That's backwards. Disciplined people reverse the equation. Seconds spent deciding, hours spent acting. That's the key. Every repeated internal debate drains energy. Every repeated internal debate creates resistance. Every repeated internal debate trains the brain to believe commitments are optional. And once commitments become optional, discipline disappears. That's why systems matter. Systems eliminate emotional bargaining. A system says the workout happens at 6. A system says reading happens before bed. A system says work begins at 9. A system removes the question. And when the question disappears, resistance becomes weaker. This is exactly why elite performers rely on routines. Not because they're rigid, not because they're boring, because routines protect energy. The world's highest performers understand something most people miss. Decision fatigue is real. Every unnecessary choice steals attention. Every unnecessary choice steals focus. Every unnecessary choice steals discipline. That's why great athletes follow routines. That's why successful business owners use schedules. That's why productive people structure their days. They understand a simple truth. Discipline grows when decisions become automatic. Again, discipline grows when decisions become automatic. The goal is not to become more motivated. The goal is to become more automatic. Imagine if brushing your teeth required motivation. Imagine if driving required motivation. Imagine if showing up to work required motivation every single day. Life would become exhausting. Instead, those behaviors became habits. Automatic, effortless, predictable. Your most important goals deserve the same treatment. Stop treating success like an emotional event. Start treating it like a scheduled event. You have a choice. You can rely on inspiration or you can rely on systems. One disappears, the other remains. One creates inconsistency, the other creates results. And here's the beautiful part. The longer you follow a system, the easier discipline becomes. Not because the task changes, because the decision disappears. The mind stops debating, the body starts moving, the resistance weakens, the habit strengthens, the behavior becomes part of who you are. That's how disciplined people are built, not through giant moments of motivation, but through thousands of repeated actions that no longer require discussion. Decide once, repeat forever. Remember that phrase, decide once, repeat forever. Because every major achievement in your life can be traced back to a decision that was made once and honored repeatedly. You don't need more inspiration. You need fewer negotiations. You don't need more excitement. You need more structure. You don't need their permission. You need a system you refuse to violate. Master this principle and discipline stops feeling difficult because the battle is no longer fought every day. The battle was already won when the decision was made. You stopped waiting to feel ready. You learned that motivation is unreliable. Now you've discovered that discipline becomes powerful when decisions become permanent. But there is another challenge waiting for you, because even after decisions become automatic, many people still quit. Why? Because they cannot tolerate repetition. They cannot tolerate boredom. And that is exactly what we'll conquer next. Chapter 4. Train yourself to love boring. There is a reason most people never achieve extraordinary results. It is not because they lack intelligence. It is not because they lack opportunity. It is not because they lack potential. It is because they cannot tolerate boredom. They want excitement. They want constant progress. They want dramatic breakthroughs. They want immediate rewards. And when those rewards don't appear, they quit. That's the pattern. Again and again. People fall in love with the idea of success, but they fall out of love with the process. And the process is usually boring. That's the truth nobody wants to hear. The road to excellence is repetitive. The road to mastery is repetitive. The road to discipline is repetitive. Extraordinary results are usually built through ordinary repetitions. That's the key. The champion repeats. The amateur gets bored. The champion repeats. The amateur gets distracted. The champion repeats. The amateur quits. You have a choice. You can spend your life chasing excitement, or you can spend your life building results. One feels good in the moment. The other creates greatness. Master the boring. Say it again. Master the boring. Because success is often disguised as repetition. Most people don't quit because the goal is impossible. They quit because the process becomes predictable. The workout feels repetitive. The studying feels repetitive. The practice feels repetitive. The work feels repetitive. And instead of understanding that repetition is the path, they assume something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. You're simply experiencing reality. The greatest achievements in human history were not built through constant novelty. They were built through consistent repetition. Think about an athlete. Most people only see the game. They see the championship. They see the trophy. They see the applause. What they don't see are the thousands of repetitions, the same drills, the same exercises, the same movements, repeated day after day, week after week, year after year. The audience sees excitement. The athlete experiences repetition. That's the key. The result is exciting. The process is often boring. Now think about a musician. People hear the performance. They hear the beautiful music. They admire the skill, but they don't see the hours spent practicing scales, the same notes, the same techniques, the same fundamentals, repeated endlessly. Why? Because mastery lives inside repetition, not inside novelty, not inside excitement. Inside repetition, master the boring. The same principle applies to business. The same principle applies to fitness. The same principle applies to learning. The same principle applies to life. People are constantly searching for shortcuts. They're searching for secret strategies. They're searching for hidden formulas. Meanwhile, successful people are doing something much simpler. They're repeating fundamentals again and again and again. Most people dramatically overestimate complicated solutions. They dramatically underestimate simple actions repeated consistently. That's why discipline is so powerful. Discipline understands something motivation never learns. The fundamentals work. The basics work. The boring work works. You don't need their permission. You don't need another secret. You need consistency. The boring work is usually the profitable work. Think about that. The business owner wants explosive growth, but growth often comes from consistent follow-up, consistent communication, consistent service, consistent execution, not exciting, profitable. The athlete wants extraordinary performance, but performance comes from consistent training, consistent recovery, consistent fundamentals, not exciting, effective. The student wants exceptional grades, but grades come from consistent study, consistent preparation, consistent effort, not exciting, powerful. The boring work is usually the profitable work, and yet most people abandon it because it lacks stimulation. That is why discipline matters. Discipline allows you to continue when excitement disappears, because excitement always disappears sooner or later every time. That's the key. The person who depends on excitement eventually stops. The person who depends on discipline continues, and the person who continues always has an advantage. You have a choice. You can chase stimulation, or you can chase results. One produces entertainment. The other produces achievement. Now let's talk about greatness. Most people have a completely inaccurate picture of greatness. They imagine greatness as something dramatic, something extraordinary, something rare. But greatness often looks surprisingly ordinary. From the outside, greatness looks boring. Imagine watching someone read 10 pages every day. Not exciting. Imagine watching someone save money every month. Not exciting. Imagine watching someone work out 4 times per week for 10 years. Not exciting. Imagine watching someone write 1 page every day. Not exciting, but give those actions enough time. Now you're looking at a successful author. Now you're looking at financial freedom. Now you're looking at exceptional fitness. Now you're looking at mastery. The outcome appears extraordinary. The behavior was ordinary. That's the lesson. Greatness often looks boring from the outside, and because it looks boring, most people ignore it. They keep searching for dramatic solutions. They keep searching for massive breakthroughs. They keep searching for magic. Meanwhile, disciplined people keep repeating the basics, and eventually the basics create extraordinary results. It's not about complexity. It's about discipline. It's not about innovation. It's about consistency. It's not about intensity. It's about repetition. Again, and again, and again. That's how greatness is built. Discipline means performing simple tasks consistently, not occasionally, not when you're inspired, not when conditions are perfect, consistently. The word is important, consistently, because anyone can perform a task once. Anyone can have one productive day. Anyone can have one motivated week. Discipline asks a different question. Can you repeat it? Can you repeat it when you're tired? Can you repeat it when you're bored? Can you repeat it when progress feels slow? Can you repeat it when nobody is watching? That is where discipline separates itself. The disciplined person understands something powerful. Boredom is not a signal to stop. Boredom is often a signal that you're doing the work correctly. Think about that. Boredom means repetition. Repetition means practice. Practice means improvement. Improvement creates results. The path is simple. Most people simply refuse to stay on it long enough. Master the boring. Every time you feel tempted to quit because the work feels repetitive, remember this lesson. The repetition is the point. The repetition is the process. The repetition is where growth lives. The repetition is where discipline is built. Master the boring. Again, master the boring, because if you can do what others find boring, you can achieve what others never achieve. If you can repeat what others abandon, you can build what others never build. If you can stay committed when excitement disappears, you can become the person others only dream of becoming. You stopped waiting to feel ready. You learned that motivation cannot be trusted. You learned that powerful systems eliminate daily negotiations. Now you've discovered that greatness is often hidden inside repetition, but there is still another obstacle standing in your way. Because even when people accept boredom, they often remain controlled by something even more dangerous, their emotions. And until emotions stop controlling behavior, discipline remains fragile. That's where we're going next. Chapter 5. Stop negotiating with your feelings. One of the most expensive mistakes you can make in life is believing that your feelings should be in charge. Not because feelings are bad, not because emotions are useless, but because emotions are unstable. They change constantly. 1 hour you feel confident. The next hour you feel uncertain. One day you feel motivated. The next day you feel discouraged. One moment you feel strong. The next moment you feel weak. That's the nature of emotion. Emotion moves. Emotion shifts. Emotion changes. And when you build your life around something that constantly changes, your results become unstable too. That's the key. Most people are not controlled by circumstances. They are controlled by feelings about circumstances, and that difference changes everything. The person who feels motivated works hard. The person who feels discouraged stops. The person who feels confident takes action. The person who feels afraid hesitates. The person who feels energized pursues goals. The person who feels tired makes excuses. Notice the pattern. The feeling becomes the leader. The feeling becomes the decision maker. The feeling becomes the authority. And when that happens, discipline disappears. You have a choice. You can let feelings lead your life, or you can let principles lead your life. One creates inconsistency. The other creates strength. One creates instability. The other creates results. Feelings are weather. Discipline is climate. Remember that. Feelings are weather. Discipline is climate. Weather changes every day. Climate remains consistent. Some days are sunny. Some days are stormy. Some days are calm. Some days are chaotic. The weather changes, but the climate remains. That is exactly how discipline works. The disciplined person does not expect perfect emotional conditions. The disciplined person expects emotions to change, and because they expect it, they refuse to obey it. That's the difference. The average person says, "I don't feel like it." The disciplined person says, "It still needs to be done." One follows emotion, the other follows commitment. And commitment always wins in the long run. Let's talk about a real-world example. Imagine it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Your alarm goes off. You didn't sleep perfectly. You're tired. You're comfortable. The bed feels warm. The room feels cold. And suddenly your mind begins negotiating. Maybe today should be a rest day. Maybe one workout doesn't matter. Maybe tomorrow would be better. Maybe you deserve more sleep. The conversation begins. The bargaining begins. The excuses begin. And if you're not careful, the commitment disappears. Now compare that to a disciplined person. The alarm goes off. They're tired too. They're not superhuman. They don't magically feel excited. They don't suddenly become energized. They experience the same discomfort. The difference is what happens next. They get up anyway, not because they feel like it, because they committed to it. That's the key. The disciplined person obeys commitments, not moods. Again, the disciplined person obeys commitments, not moods. This principle applies everywhere. The writer writes when inspiration is absent. The athlete trains when energy is low. The entrepreneur works when motivation disappears. The student studies when entertainment looks more attractive. Why? Because commitments matter more than moods. The average person asks, "How do I feel?" The disciplined person asks, "What did I commit to?" One question creates excuses. The other creates progress. You don't need their permission. You don't need perfect emotions. You need commitment. Now let's go deeper. Every day, whether you realize it or not, you're training yourself. Every choice reinforces something. Every action strengthens a habit. Every response shapes your identity, and that means every time you obey discomfort, you're teaching yourself something dangerous. You're teaching yourself that discomfort is authority. You're teaching yourself that resistance should be obeyed. You're teaching yourself that difficult feelings deserve control, and over time, that lesson becomes automatic. Soon, every uncomfortable emotion becomes a stop sign. Every challenge becomes a reason to quit. Every obstacle becomes an excuse. That's why discipline matters. Discipline interrupts that pattern. Discipline says discomfort is information, not instruction. Think about that. Discomfort is information, not instruction. Just because something feels difficult doesn't mean you should stop. Just because something feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because something feels unpleasant doesn't mean it's harmful. Growth often feels uncomfortable. Progress often feels uncomfortable. Improvement often feels uncomfortable. That's normal. That's expected. That's part of the process. You have a choice. You can obey discomfort, or you can obey purpose. One makes you weaker. The other makes you stronger. Every time you obey discomfort, you become weaker. Every time you obey purpose, you become stronger. Again, every time you obey discomfort, you become weaker. Every time you obey purpose, you become stronger. This is not philosophy. This is training, because discipline is built one decision at a time. Every time you honor a commitment despite resistance, discipline grows. Every time you follow through despite doubt, discipline grows. Every time you act despite discomfort, discipline grows. The opposite is also true. Every time you abandon a commitment because of a feeling, discipline shrinks. Every time you quit because you don't feel motivated, discipline shrinks. Every time you obey an excuse, discipline shrinks. Your identity is being shaped every day, not by what you intend, by what you repeatedly do. That's the key. You become what you repeatedly practice. If you repeatedly practice avoidance, you become someone who avoids. If you repeatedly practice excuses, you become someone who excuses. If you repeatedly practice discipline, you become someone who follows through. It's not about emotion. It's about discipline. It's not about comfort. It's about commitment. It's not about feelings. It's about standards. The strongest people are not the people with the best emotions. They are the people with the strongest standards. They don't expect life to feel easy. They don't expect motivation to stay. They don't expect perfect conditions. They expect resistance. They expect discomfort. They expect emotional fluctuations. And because they expect them, they are not surprised by them. They simply continue. That is power, not controlling your emotions, refusing to be controlled by them. Remember this lesson. Feelings are weather. Discipline is climate. Feelings change. Commitments remain. Feelings fluctuate. Standards remain. Feelings come and go. Purpose remains. You have a choice. Every day, every hour, every moment. Follow your feelings or follow your commitments. One creates temporary comfort. The other creates permanent growth. And the person you want to become is built every time you choose commitment over comfort. You stopped waiting to feel ready. You learned that motivation cannot be trusted. You built systems instead of endless negotiations. You learned to embrace repetition instead of running from it. And now you've learned that feelings are terrible leaders. But discipline requires one more critical skill, because even after you stop obeying emotions, you still need proof that you can trust yourself. And that proof is built through something small, simple, and incredibly powerful. Chapter 6. Build proof through small wins. Most people are waiting for confidence. They think confidence arrives first. They think confidence appears before action. They think confidence is something you magically discover. It isn't. Confidence is earned. Self-trust is earned. Discipline is earned. And all of them are built the same way. Through evidence. Through proof. Through keeping promises to yourself. That's the key. Most people don't lack potential. They lack proof. They have made so many promises to themselves and broken them that they no longer trust their own words. Think about that. How many times have you told yourself you would start? How many times have you promised yourself you would change? How many times have you declared that this would be different and then failed to follow through? The problem isn't just the missed goal. The problem is the message you're sending yourself. Every broken promise teaches your mind something. It teaches your mind that your words don't matter. It teaches your mind that your commitments are optional. It teaches your mind that your intentions cannot be trusted. Over time, self-doubt grows, not because you're incapable, because you've trained yourself not to believe your own promises. That's why self-trust is earned, not imagined. You don't build self-trust by thinking differently. You build self-trust by acting differently. Again, you don't build self-trust by thinking differently. You build self-trust by acting differently. You have a choice. You can continue making promises you don't keep, or you can start building evidence. One weakens confidence, the other strengthens confidence. Keep promises to yourself. Remember that phrase. Keep promises to yourself, because every time you follow through, you create proof. Proof that you can be trusted. Proof that you can be disciplined. Proof that you can change. And proof is more powerful than motivation. Now here's where most people make a mistake. They believe the promise needs to be big. They think transformation requires massive action. It doesn't. In fact, massive promises often create massive failures. The person who never exercises decides to work out 2 hours every day. The person who never reads decides to read 50 books this year. The person who never wakes up early suddenly tries to wake up at 4 in the morning. The goal sounds impressive. The execution collapses because the promise was larger than the habit. Disciplined people understand something different. Small promises are easier to keep, and every kept promise creates proof. That's the key. The goal is not to impress yourself. The goal is to trust yourself. Let's say you decide to read 5 pages every day. 5 pages. That's it. Not 50. Not 100. 5. Can you do that? Of course. Now imagine doing it tomorrow. And the next day. And the next day. Soon something begins to happen. Your identity starts shifting. You stop seeing yourself as someone who wants to read. You become someone who reads. That's the difference. The action changes the identity, not the other way around. Or imagine walking for 10 minutes every day. 10 minutes. Simple, manageable, almost impossible to fail. Yet after weeks and months, something changes. You become someone who exercises consistently. You become someone who honors commitments. You become someone who follows through. The action creates the identity. That's the key. Small actions create identity shifts. Most people are obsessed with outcomes. Disciplined people focus on evidence. The outcome will eventually arrive. But first, you need proof. Proof that you can show up. Proof that you can be consistent. Proof that you can finish what you start. Keep promises to yourself. Again, keep promises to yourself. Now let's talk about identity, because identity is where real transformation occurs. Most people say things like, I want to become disciplined. I want to become focused. I want to become successful. But wanting is not enough. Identity changes through behavior. Every action casts a vote. Every action reinforces a belief. Every action tells your brain who you are. Read 5 pages. You cast a vote for being a reader. Walk 10 minutes. You cast a vote for being active. Save $10. You cast a vote for being responsible. Write 1 page. You cast a vote for being a writer. The action may seem small. The identity shift is enormous. That's why tiny wins matter, not because of what they accomplish, because of what they prove. They prove you're becoming someone different. And once identity begins changing, discipline becomes easier, because now you're no longer forcing behavior. You're expressing identity. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. It's not about dreaming. It's about evidence. It's not about confidence. It's about proof. Now let's discuss one of the greatest misconceptions about discipline. People think discipline begins with giant acts of willpower. It doesn't. Massive discipline starts with microscopic consistency. Again, massive discipline starts with microscopic consistency. The strongest buildings begin with small foundations. The tallest trees begin as tiny seeds. The greatest achievements begin as small actions repeated over time. Yet people constantly underestimate this process. Because small actions don't feel dramatic. Small actions don't feel life-changing. Small actions don't create instant transformation. But small actions create momentum, and momentum changes everything. Imagine a snowball rolling downhill. At first, it looks insignificant, small, slow, unimportant. But it keeps moving. It keeps growing. It keeps accumulating. Eventually, it becomes powerful. Eventually, it becomes unstoppable. That's exactly how discipline works. Tiny victories compound into unstoppable momentum. One workout becomes a habit. One habit becomes a lifestyle. One lifestyle becomes an identity. One identity changes an entire future. That's the key. The goal is not a massive victory. The goal is the next victory, the next promise, the next action, the next proof. You have a choice. You can continue chasing dramatic change, or you can start building evidence. One produces frustration, the other produces momentum. One creates pressure, the other creates progress. And progress matters more than perfection, always. The disciplined person understands this. They don't obsess over giant leaps. They focus on consistent steps. They don't try to become extraordinary overnight. They become slightly better today, then slightly better tomorrow, then slightly better again. And eventually the results become extraordinary, not because the actions were extraordinary, because they were repeated. Remember this lesson. Keep promises to yourself. Start small enough to succeed. Build proof. Build evidence. Build trust. Because self-trust is the foundation of discipline. And discipline is the foundation of transformation. Every promise you keep strengthens your identity. Every small win strengthens your confidence. Every tiny victory builds momentum. And momentum, once established, becomes one of the most powerful forces in your life. You stopped waiting to feel ready. You learned that motivation is unreliable. You built systems instead of relying on feelings. You embraced repetition. You learned to honor commitments over emotions. And now you've discovered that confidence is built through proof, not wishes. But there is another challenge ahead, because even disciplined people struggle when temptation remains within reach. And if you truly want to become unstoppable, you must learn how to remove the very things that pull you backward. Chapter 7. Remove the escape routes. Most people believe their biggest problem is a lack of willpower. It isn't. Most people believe they fail because they aren't strong enough. That isn't true either. The real problem is much simpler. They leave themselves too many escape routes, too many exits, too many alternatives, too many opportunities to quit. And when quitting remains easy, discipline remains fragile. That's the key. Every goal becomes harder when escape is convenient. Every commitment becomes weaker when excuses remain available. Most failures happen because alternatives remain available. Think about that. A person decides to focus on work, but their phone sits next to them. Social media remains installed. Notifications remain active. Entertainment remains one click away. Then they wonder why concentration feels impossible. The answer is obvious. The escape route is always open. A person decides to improve their health. But the kitchen remains filled with junk food. The unhealthy habits remain accessible. The temptations remain visible. Then they wonder why consistency feels difficult. Again, the answer is obvious. The escape route is always open. A person decides to save money, but they continue surrounding themselves with unnecessary spending opportunities. The habits remain unchanged. The environment remains unchanged. Then they wonder why progress never arrives. The pattern is the same. The escape route remains available. You have a choice. You can keep every exit open, or you can commit. One creates weakness. The other creates discipline. Burn the excuses. Remember that phrase, burn the excuses, because every excuse left available eventually becomes an excuse used. Most people spend years trying to strengthen willpower. Disciplined people do something smarter. They reduce temptation. They reduce friction. They remove distractions. They eliminate escape routes. Why? Because they understand a truth that most people ignore. Environment often beats willpower. Again, environment often beats willpower. The strongest person can struggle in a bad environment. The average person can thrive in a good environment. That's why your surroundings matter. More than you think, more than you admit, more than most people realize. Look at your daily life. What are you making easy? And what are you making difficult? Because whatever is easy gets repeated, and whatever is difficult gets avoided. That's human nature. The disciplined person uses this reality instead of fighting it. Now let's talk about distractions. One of the greatest discipline killers in modern life. Most people don't lose focus once. They lose focus hundreds of times every day. A notification appears, a message arrives, a video recommendation appears, a social media feed updates, and suddenly attention disappears. Minutes become hours, hours become days, days become months. The goal remains unfinished, not because the person lacked potential, because distractions remained available. Burn the excuses. Delete the app, turn off the notification, remove the distraction, create distance between yourself and temptation. That's the key. Every distraction removed creates focus. Every temptation removed creates freedom. Every escape route removed strengthens discipline. You don't need their permission. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer distractions. Think about the people who consistently achieve difficult goals. Many of them are not constantly resisting temptation. They have simply made temptation harder to access. That is a completely different strategy. And it works. Now let's discuss accountability, because accountability is another way of removing escape routes. When nobody knows your commitment, quitting feels easy. When nobody expects progress, excuses feel comfortable. When nobody can see your actions, avoidance becomes simple, but accountability changes the equation. Tell someone your goal, create consequences, create expectations, create visibility. Suddenly, the escape route becomes smaller. Suddenly, excuses become harder to justify. Suddenly, discipline becomes easier to maintain. That's the key. People often think accountability creates pressure. What it actually creates is structure, and structure supports discipline. Now let's go deeper. Why do escape routes matter so much? Because the human brain naturally seeks convenience. The brain wants comfort. The brain wants the path of least resistance. The brain wants immediate gratification. This is normal. This is natural. This is predictable. The mistake is pretending you're immune to it. You're not. Nobody is. That's why disciplined people don't trust temptation. They design around temptation. They don't assume they'll always make the right decision. They make the wrong decision harder. Think about that. They don't rely on self-control. They rely on preparation. That's a completely different mindset, and it changes everything. Imagine two people trying to avoid unhealthy food. The first person keeps unhealthy food everywhere in hopes for self-control. The second person removes it from the environment entirely. Who succeeds more often? The answer is obvious. The environment wins. Again, environment often beats willpower. The same principle applies to productivity, to fitness, to finances, to learning, to every meaningful goal. Success is often environmental design. Most people are trying to become stronger. Disciplined people are becoming smarter. They stop asking, "How can I resist temptation?" And they start asking, "How can I remove temptation?" That question changes everything. You have a choice. Fight temptation every day, or make temptation harder. One creates constant struggle. The other creates consistent progress. Success is often environmental design. Remember that. Success is often environmental design. The environment either supports discipline or sabotages discipline. There is rarely a middle ground. Look around your life. Look at your workspace. Look at your phone. Look at your habits. Look at your routines. Are they helping you, or are they helping your distractions? Because your environment is constantly influencing your behavior, whether you notice it or not. Whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you like it or not, the disciplined person accepts this reality and then designs around it. They place books where they can see them. They remove distractions before they begin working. They schedule important tasks. They create accountability. They make good choices easier. They make bad choices harder. Simple, practical, effective. Burn the excuses. Again, burn the excuses. Because every excuse removed increases your chance of success. Every distraction removed increases your focus. Every temptation removed increases your discipline. And eventually something remarkable happens. Discipline stops feeling like a constant battle. Not because you've become superhuman, because you've removed many of the obstacles that were draining your energy. That's the key. Discipline becomes easier when temptation becomes harder. Most people think discipline means constantly fighting yourself. Not necessarily. Often it means creating an environment where the right choice becomes the easiest choice. That is wisdom. That is strategy. That is discipline. It's not about willpower, it's about discipline. It's not about resisting every temptation, it's about removing unnecessary temptation. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about creating conditions that support success. Remember this lesson: burn the excuses. Remove the exits, eliminate the distractions, create accountability, design your environment, because every escape route you remove makes discipline stronger, and every temptation you eliminate makes progress easier. You stopped waiting for motivation. You learned to trust systems. You embraced repetition. You stopped obeying feelings. You built confidence through small wins. And now you've discovered that success often depends on removing the paths that lead backward. But there is still another level, because once distractions disappear and discipline grows stronger, a new challenge emerges: the challenge of finishing. Because many people begin, far fewer finish, and finishing is where results are born. Chapter 8. Become the person who always finishes. There is a reason so many people remain trapped in potential, not because they lack ideas, not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, because they never finish. They start, then they stop. They begin, then they abandon. They dream, then they delay. Starting is common, finishing is rare, and that is exactly why results belong to finishers. That's the key. The world is filled with people who started. The world is transformed by people who finished. Think about your own life. How many projects have you started? How many goals have you announced? How many plans have you created? How many ambitions have excited you? Now, ask a harder question. How many did you finish? That question matters, because life does not reward intentions. Life rewards completion. A half-built bridge serves no purpose. A half-written book changes no lives. A half-finished business creates no success. A half-hearted commitment produces no transformation. Completion is where value is created. Completion is where results are born. Completion is where discipline becomes visible. Finish what you start. Remember that phrase, finish what you start. Because every unfinished project carries a hidden cost, a cost most people never recognize. Every unfinished goal leaves behind doubt. Every abandoned commitment leaves behind evidence. Evidence that says, maybe I won't follow through, maybe I won't finish, maybe I can't trust myself. That evidence accumulates, and eventually it becomes identity. The person no longer sees themselves as someone who finishes. They see themselves as someone who starts, and there is a huge difference. You have a choice. You can become someone who collects beginnings, or someone who creates endings. One creates frustration, the other creates results. Finish what you start. Let's talk about a powerful example. The writer. Thousands of people dream about writing a book. Thousands talk about it. Thousands plan for it. Thousands imagine holding the finished manuscript. But very few actually finish. Why? Because writing a book becomes difficult after the excitement disappears. The idea feels exciting, the process feels repetitive, the beginning feels inspiring, the middle feels frustrating, and that is where most people quit. Not because they lack ability, because they lack persistence. Now compare that person with another writer. This writer is not necessarily more talented, not necessarily smarter, not necessarily more creative. They simply keep going, page after page, chapter after chapter, week after week, until the book is finished. And once it is finished, opportunities appear. Publishers can evaluate it. Readers can buy it. Feedback can improve it. Income can be generated from it. None of that happens before completion. That's the key. Completion creates opportunities. Again, completion creates opportunities. People often focus on perfecting. Disciplined people focus on finishing. Perfection can be improved later. Completion must happen first. You don't need their permission. You don't need perfect conditions. You need completion. Think about how many opportunities never arrive because people never finish. The business idea never launches. The course never gets completed. The skill never gets developed. The project never reaches the world. Not because it wasn't valuable, because it wasn't finished. That is the hidden tragedy of unrealized potential. Potential means nothing without execution. Execution means little without completion. Finish what you start. Now let's discuss why finishing feels so difficult. Because finishing forces you to confront discomfort. At the beginning, possibilities are unlimited. Everything feels exciting. Everything feels possible. But as you continue, reality appears. Problems appear, mistakes appear, boredom appears, resistance appears, and suddenly the fantasy disappears. This is where discipline becomes essential. The disciplined person understands something important. The middle is supposed to be difficult. The middle is where most people leave. The middle is where most dreams die. And because most people quit there, the disciplined person gains an enormous advantage simply by continuing. That's the key. Persistence is often a competitive advantage, not brilliance, not talent. Persistence. Keep moving, keep working, keep finishing. Now let's talk about identity, because every completed goal changes the way you see yourself. Every finished project becomes proof. Proof that you follow through. Proof that you are disciplined. Proof that your commitments matter. Every completed goal strengthens identity. Again, every completed goal strengthens identity. This is why finishing matters far beyond the actual result. The external reward is valuable, but the internal reward is even more powerful. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to believe yourself. You begin to respect yourself because you have evidence. You said you would do something, and you did it. That matters more than most people realize. Confidence is not created by positive thinking. Confidence is created by evidence, and completion provides evidence. The opposite is also true. Every unfinished goal weakens self-belief. Every abandoned commitment creates doubt. Every broken promise leaves a mark. Not because failure is permanent, because repetition creates identity. If you repeatedly quit, quitting becomes familiar. If you repeatedly finish, finishing becomes familiar. You become what you repeatedly practice. That's the key. Success is often an identity before it becomes a result. The person who finishes one goal becomes more likely to finish another. The person who follows through once becomes more likely to follow through again. Momentum grows, discipline grows, identity grows, and eventually finishing becomes normal. That's what you want. You don't want finishing to be a special event. You want finishing to be your standard. You have a choice. You can keep chasing new beginnings, or you can become obsessed with completion. One creates excitement, the other creates achievement. One feels productive, the other actually produces results. It's not about talent, it's about discipline. It's not about inspiration, it's about completion. It's not about starting, it's about finishing. Remember that. Finish what you start. When the excitement disappears, continue. When progress slows, continue. When mistakes appear, continue. When the outcome feels far away, continue, because most people stop. And that is exactly why continuing is so powerful. The disciplined person does not need constant enthusiasm. The disciplined person needs commitment. The disciplined person does not need perfect conditions. The disciplined person needs persistence. The disciplined person understands that results belong to finishers, not dreamers, not planners, not talkers, finishers. Remember this lesson. Finish what you start. Completion creates opportunities. Completion creates confidence. Completion creates identity. Every unfinished goal weakens self-belief. Every completed goal strengthens identity. And the person who learns to finish gains access to a level of discipline that most people never experience. You stopped waiting to feel ready. You stopped depending on motivation. You built systems. You embraced repetition. You stopped negotiating with your feelings. You built proof through small wins. You removed escape routes. And now you've learned that completion is the bridge between effort and results. But there is still one challenge that every disciplined person must face. Because no matter how committed you become, discomfort never completely disappears. The question is not whether you will suffer. The question is which type of suffering you will choose. Chapter 9. Learn to suffer productively. There is a truth about success that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. Every meaningful achievement contains discomfort. Every meaningful achievement requires sacrifice. Every meaningful achievement demands a price. And that price is pain. Not physical pain necessarily, but discomfort, effort, uncertainty, struggle, resistance. The problem is not that pain exists. The problem is that most people spend their lives trying to escape it. And in doing so, they unknowingly choose a different kind of pain. That's the key. Pain is unavoidable. Suffering is unavoidable. The only thing you control is which pain you choose. Choose your pain. Remember that phrase. Choose your pain. Because every life contains discomfort. The disciplined person understands this. The undisciplined person fights it. The disciplined person accepts it. The undisciplined person avoids it. And that difference determines the direction of a life. Most people have been taught to pursue comfort, seek convenience, avoid difficulty, escape struggle, take the easy path. But comfort comes with consequences, consequences that often arrive later, and when they arrive with interest. The pain you avoid today often becomes the pain you experience tomorrow. That's the lesson. Avoiding pain guarantees mediocrity. Again, avoiding pain guarantees mediocrity, not because you lack talent, not because you lack opportunity. Because growth requires discomfort. There is no way around it. There is only through it. You have a choice. You can face temporary discomfort now, or permanent frustration later. One creates growth, the other creates regret. Choose your pain. Let's talk about two types of pain, the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. Every person experiences one of them, sometimes both, but nobody escapes them entirely. The pain of discipline is waking up early when you don't want to. The pain of discipline is exercising when you're tired. The pain of discipline is studying when others are relaxing. The pain of discipline is saving money when spending feels easier. The pain of discipline is staying focused when distraction looks attractive. It hurts. It requires effort. It demands sacrifice. But there is something important about this pain. It builds. It strengthens. It creates. The pain of discipline builds your future. Now compare that to regret. The regret of wasted years. The regret of abandoned goals. The regret of unrealized potential. The regret of opportunities missed. The regret of promises broken. That pain is different. That pain doesn't build. It destroys. It weakens. It haunts. One pain creates possibility. The other pain creates disappointment. That's the key. One pain builds your future. The other destroys it. Choose your pain. Again, choose your pain. Because every decision is a trade. Every action carries a cost. Every inaction carries a cost. Most people focus only on the immediate cost. They never consider the long-term cost. The workout feels difficult today, but poor health feels difficult later. Saving money feels restrictive today. Financial stress feels restrictive later. Learning a skill feels uncomfortable today. Being left behind feels uncomfortable later. You are paying a price either way. The question is simple. Which price creates a better future? The disciplined person understands delayed consequences. The average person focuses only on immediate feelings. That is why discipline wins. Now let's discuss discomfort itself. Most people treat discomfort like an emergency. The moment something becomes difficult, they assume something is wrong. The moment resistance appears, they assume they should stop. The moment effort becomes necessary, they begin searching for alternatives. But discomfort is not always a warning sign. Sometimes discomfort is evidence that you're growing. Think about physical training. Muscles grow through resistance. Strength grows through resistance. Endurance grows through resistance. Without resistance, growth stops. The same principle applies everywhere. Mental strength grows through resistance. Confidence grows through resistance. Discipline grows through resistance. That's the key. The obstacle is often the training. The discomfort is often the lesson. The challenge is often the opportunity. You have a choice. Run from discomfort or learn from discomfort. One keeps you where you are. The other transforms you. Successful people understand this. They do not enjoy every difficult moment. They are not immune to discomfort. They simply develop tolerance for it. That is one of the greatest advantages you can ever build. Tolerance for discomfort, because discomfort is where most people quit. And if you can remain there longer than others, you gain an enormous advantage. Think about a difficult workout. Most people stop when discomfort begins. Disciplined people continue a little longer. Think about a challenging project. Most people quit when frustration appears. Disciplined people continue a little longer. Think about a difficult conversation. Most people avoid it. Disciplined people have it anyway. That extra effort compounds. That extra persistence compounds. That extra tolerance compounds. And over time, it creates extraordinary results, not because the person was extraordinary, because their tolerance was extraordinary. It's not about talent. It's about discipline. It's not about comfort. It's about tolerance. It's not about ease. It's about growth. Again, growth begins where comfort ends. Remember that phrase. Growth begins where comfort ends. Everything you want exists outside your comfort zone. The stronger body, the stronger mind, the stronger career, the stronger relationships, the stronger identity. All of it exists beyond comfort, and that is why comfort can become dangerous. Comfort is pleasant. Comfort is relaxing. Comfort is familiar. But comfort can also become a prison because comfort encourages staying the same. Growth demands change, and change always contains discomfort. That's why discipline matters. Discipline gives you the ability to move through discomfort instead of running from it. Discipline allows you to choose long-term rewards over short-term relief. Discipline teaches you to stop asking, "How can I avoid discomfort?" and start asking, "How can I use discomfort?" That question changes everything because now discomfort becomes useful. Now struggle becomes productive. Now resistance becomes training. Now suffering becomes growth. That's the key. Learn to suffer productively, not recklessly, not unnecessarily, productively. Use discomfort to become stronger. Use challenges to become wiser. Use resistance to become more disciplined. Every difficult moment contains an opportunity. The question is whether you will use it. You have a choice. Choose comfort or choose growth. Choose ease or choose strength. Choose avoidance or choose transformation. One path feels easier today. The other path feels better years from now. Choose your pain. Again, choose your pain. Because the pain of discipline ends in pride. The pain of regret ends in disappointment. The pain of discipline builds confidence. The pain of regret destroys confidence. The pain of discipline creates freedom. The pain of regret creates limitations. Remember this lesson. Every meaningful achievement contains discomfort. Avoiding pain guarantees mediocrity. One pain builds your future. The other destroys it. Successful people develop tolerance for discomfort, and growth begins where comfort ends. You stopped waiting for motivation. You learned to trust systems. You embraced repetition. You stopped obeying emotions. You built confidence through small wins. You removed escape routes. You learned to finish what you start. And now you've learned that discomfort is not your enemy. Avoidance is. But there is one final transformation remaining. Because discipline becomes truly unbreakable when it stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Chapter 10. Become unbreakable. Everything you've learned in this audiobook leads to one final truth. Discipline is not an action. Discipline is not a habit. Discipline is not a technique. Discipline is an identity. And until you understand that, discipline will always feel fragile because actions come and go. Feelings come and go. Motivation comes and goes. Even habits can be broken. But identity is different. Identity is personal. Identity is powerful. Identity shapes behavior. That's the key. Most people focus on what they want to do. The strongest people focus on who they want to become. That is a completely different approach. One focuses on outcomes. The other focuses on identity. One asks, "What should I do today?" The other asks, "Who am I becoming?" And that question changes everything. Because when discipline becomes part of your identity, decisions become easier. The person who sees themselves as disciplined no longer debates every action. The person who sees themselves as reliable no longer negotiates every commitment. The person who sees themselves as someone who follows through no longer searches for excuses. Why? Because the behavior matches the identity. And identity is powerful. This is who I am. Remember that phrase. This is who I am. The person who says, "I am disciplined," behaves differently. The person who says, "I am committed," behaves differently. The person who says, "I finish what I start," behaves differently. Not because they're perfect, because their identity influences their actions. You have a choice. You can build your life around temporary emotions, or you can build your life around a permanent identity. One changes every day. The other guides every day. This is who I am. Now think about everything you've learned. You stopped waiting to feel ready. You learned that motivation is unreliable. You learned to make decisions once. You trained yourself to embrace repetition. You stopped obeying your feelings. You built proof through small wins. You removed escape routes. You learned to finish. You learned to suffer productively. What was the purpose of all those lessons? To build an identity, not merely a collection of behaviors. An identity. because behaviors can be forced. Identity becomes natural. That's the key. The goal is not to act disciplined occasionally. The goal is to become a disciplined person. A disciplined person doesn't need constant reminders. A disciplined person doesn't need endless motivation. A disciplined person doesn't need perfect conditions. They simply act according to who they are. This is who I am. Again, this is who I am. Now let's discuss obstacles, because life will test you. That is guaranteed. There will be difficult days, unexpected setbacks, disappointments, failures, stress, fatigue, moments when everything feels harder than it should. And in those moments, identity becomes everything, because identity-driven behavior survives obstacles. The person who depends on motivation struggles when motivation disappears. The person who depends on identity continues. The person who says, "I work out when I feel inspired," eventually stops. The person who says, "I am someone who trains," continues. The person who says, "I work hard when I'm motivated," eventually stops. The person who says, "I am someone who follows through," continues. Can you see the difference? One depends on feelings, the other depends on identity. And identity survives where motivation fails. That's the key. Identity-driven behavior survives obstacles. This is why some people remain consistent under pressure, not because pressure doesn't affect them, because their standards remain stronger than the pressure. They know who they are, and they refuse to violate it. You don't need their permission. You don't need perfect circumstances. You need standards. Strong standards. Standards that survive difficult days. Standards that survive setbacks. Standards that survive emotional storms. Now let's talk about excuses. Most excuses are not logical. They are emotional. Most excuses appear when identity is weak. When identity is unclear, excuses become persuasive. When identity is strong, excuses lose power. Think about someone who truly identifies as a professional. Would they skip important responsibilities because they don't feel like it? Rarely. Why? Because professionalism is part of their identity. The excuse conflicts with who they are. The same principle applies to discipline. When discipline becomes personal, excuses lose power. Again. When discipline becomes personal, excuses lose power because every excuse now creates internal conflict. The excuse says quit. The identity says continue. The excuse says delay. The identity says execute. The excuse says stop. The identity says finish. And when identity becomes strong enough, the argument ends. This is who I am. That's the key. Most people try to eliminate excuses. The stronger strategy is building an identity that makes excuses incompatible. Now let's discuss standards, because standards are the practical expression of identity. The strongest people don't rely on motivation. They rely on standards they refuse to violate. Think about that. They do not wake up asking how they feel. They ask what their standards require. They do not negotiate with temporary emotions. They follow permanent principles. That is why they appear unbreakable, not because they never struggle, because they refuse to lower their standards during struggle. The disciplined person says, "I keep my word. I show up. I follow through. I finish." Not because it's easy, because those are their standards. This is who I am. Again, this is who I am. You have a choice. You can build your life around feelings, or you can build your life around standards. One creates inconsistency. The other creates strength. One creates excuses. The other creates identity. It's not about motivation. It's about discipline. It's not about inspiration. It's about standards. It's not about temporary effort. It's about permanent identity. Remember that. The strongest people are not always the most talented. They are not always the smartest. They are not always the most gifted, but they are often the most consistent. And consistency is the natural result of identity, because identity influences behavior. Behavior creates results. Results reinforce identity, and the cycle continues. That's how unbreakable people are built. One choice, one action, one commitment at a time, until discipline stops being something they do and becomes something they are. This is who I am. Let that phrase stay with you. When motivation disappears, this is who I am. When discomfort appears, this is who I am. When excuses arrive, this is who I am. When progress feels slow, this is who I am. When nobody is watching, this is who I am, Because the ultimate goal of discipline is not achievement. The ultimate goal is transformation, to become someone who can be trusted, someone who follows through, someone who acts despite feelings, someone who honors commitments, someone who refuses to quit, someone who becomes unbreakable. And that person is not created in a single moment. That person is created through every lesson you've learned in this audiobook, every repetition, every commitment, every difficult decision, every act of discipline, until one day, discipline is no longer something you practice. It is simply who you are. This is who I am. The audiobook is complete. Now the real work begins. You now know the truth. You don't need more motivation. You don't need another inspirational video. You don't need the perfect morning, the perfect mindset, or the perfect circumstances. You need discipline. You need the ability to act when you don't feel like acting. You need the courage to move before confidence arrives. You need the strength to keep promises to yourself. Remember what you've learned. Start before you're ready. Do it anyway. Master the boring. Stop negotiating with your feelings. Keep promises to yourself. Burn the excuses. Finish what you start. Choose the pain of discipline over the pain of regret. And above all, become the person who does what they said they would do. Starting today, stop asking yourself whether you feel motivated. Ask yourself a better question. What must be done right now? Then do it. No excuses, no delays, no negotiations. Your challenge begins the moment this audiobook ends. Take one action immediately. Not tomorrow, not later, now.